of all the things you could spend 10 years of emotionally laborious cortisol-inducing work on, why is this the thing that you want to do? Like, I had a founder I invested in. He was doing great, lost half of his revenue in a week.
Meet Mike MacCombie, an investor, community builder, and behavior science enthusiast. He's the venture partner at NextGen Venture Partners and mentor at Techstars. Known for building one of the most connected early-stage ecosystems, he brings a behavioral lens to how founders grow and make decisions. From co-founding the underground to advising startups, he blends behavior science, storytelling, and community to help companies scale.
A lot of them are stressed out and they feel lonely. They feel like they can't ever reveal weakness. It's your pain cave, the thing that nobody else wants to do. And you said, no, I enjoy this. That's when you're definitively built for something.
What do you think founders really struggle with that isn't talked about enough? All right, welcome back to another episode of Built for This, where we explore people, patterns, and perspectives shaping how we build and connect. Today, I'm joined by Mike MacCombie, venture investor, community builder, and someone deeply interested in the psychology behind how people think, act, and make decisions. Mike's work sits at a unique intersection, investing in companies, building communities, and understanding the behavioral patterns that both drive success and failure. Because at the end of the day, whether it's startups, capital, or culture, it all comes back to people. In this episode, we're going to explore Mike's journey into venture, how community became a core part of his work, the role behavioral psychology plays in investing and decision-making, and what founders often get wrong about people. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Lots of cool things in terms of what you've done and what I love to geek out on. So I'm excited to get into all the psychology side of things. But for how we love to start every episode is getting to learn a little bit more about you, your background, and kind of how you got to where you're at today before we dig into all the amazing kind of work things you do. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how it all started, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I did not expect to be in the world that I am now. It was a very, I'll say, non-straight line on the bingo card. I grew up, I was the son of two child developmental psychologists. I was always a geek about the brains, but my dad would help me take apart electronics and build model rockets. So sort of, I understand why people think, but also the systems behind what makes people go. School, I studied social sciences, so econ, public policy, education history, going from rockets and computers up to systems and people. And getting to that point after that, I did not know I would end up a VC. Even then, my first career, I was a teacher. I taught middle school students with special needs in the South Bronx and Harlem for 4 years. I then was a behavior science-based consultant. Instead of lesson plans to kids, I was thinking about what would be compelling about products, loyalty programs, communities, and experiences for businesses and their users. And then I got into VC, working at a fund as their head of ecosystem, and decided to branch off and do my own fund after that. So the common thread across all of it was I was very curious about what made people care, what made people work, what made them learn, and what made them grow. And then it was sort of different manifestations of that across the chapters.
Yeah, and I'm curious, kind of standing where you're at now, and obviously looking back, hindsight's always 2020. And no surprise given your parents' roles of why that was always kind of in your world or something in the back of your mind of how people come together, how people learn, how people connect, and obviously from a product perspective. But when did you really, you know, have the moment from a teacher to look at kind of more business and what drew you that direction to kind of decide I'm going to do a massive pivot and do something totally different than what I'm currently teaching?
I would say teaching was really good for the heart. And I learned a lot in very specific ways, but I can say after 4 years of teaching middle school math, there wasn't a whole lot of new learning that I was getting. I studied three different things in college and I was taking language classes. So, like, intellectual stimulation has been a huge thing for me. And I
Yeah.
remember going to a launch party for a startup in spring of 2015. And in one day I said, oh my gosh, I've been missing the stimulation. I had friends who I'd met that were showing me the new products, and I was just learning about all these different companies as I was there. And that sense of this is, it felt like I was coming back into the light of intellectual novelty. And that was a big sense of, okay, I need to do it. So I started watching every Shark Tank episode I could. I started getting into businesses as much as I could. But sort of that rediscovery from having studied entrepreneurship in college was a big pivot point for me of just remembering how good it felt to be learning all those new things.
Yeah. And I'm curious about, the role into creating ecosystems and community was there always kind of this dotted line from like the experience of like obviously kids getting them engaged and getting to connect with each other? Then, okay, I need to learn this way in behavioral psychology. Or like, how did you kind of get into like, oh, this is something really fascinating and I think I'm going to be really good at building this?
I think it was a tool that I had been using since I was young, and I just realized that it was applicable to all these other things. So, my mom passed away when I was 8 years old, and I felt very helpless and alone. And one of the things that I worked on was how do I build these places in my life where I feel like I can count on things still being there. And in that work, I started really just focusing on bringing people around myself. Happened in college, and as a teacher, when I felt like I was still learning how to bring everybody into a good set of habits in the
Yeah.
classroom, I got to know every parent as much as I could. I said, "Look, I am still getting to know all of you, but I will know every one of your parents closely and deeply before the end of this year." And having that community made everything way easier. It just felt like there was more contextualization across the board. And so after having that point of community meant agency, it just became the internal neural pathway I had across the board. And I said, okay, I want to get into tech. And you can imagine being a former teacher going into a tech event. A lot of eyes glaze over. They sort of say, okay, enjoy your life. Like maybe you'll get a customer success job at an ed tech startup. And I said, okay, this isn't working. So I started a community for people where I never felt like it was just superficial outcomes-based networking, and I built it as a event series that grew over 3 or 4 years across 3 cities and of many thousands of people, where it was curated by personality. You couldn't talk about work, you couldn't bring business cards, you couldn't move on from a conversation, and you only were allowed to join if you were positive, pleasant, interesting, generous, and open-minded. One of the, causes in me calling my fund Generous Ventures came from that back in the day curation.
Right.
So, overall, it was just every time I felt like there wasn't something there, it's like if I could build a community where I or other people have a space to be different, learn different, act different, it opened up a lot of pathways I didn't expect before.
Yeah, and I'm curious, from your perspective and your experiences, just, meeting lots of people trying to get into that world and I'll say the venture world in certain areas, a little tough to break through that door, a little tough to get accepted sometimes. Obviously, if you already come in with I'm connected to so and so, or you get access into one of those deals, you kind of get that pathway. And I think, I've had a mix of being people who I think have definitely gotten jaded by that world, and then either kind of step into being maybe somebody that they're not because that's the only way that they're gonna be able to break through, and taking the opposite lens of, like, "How do I create this different? How do I build community?" What was it about it that, I guess, challenge accepted? Or, what kind of tension or kind of pushback did you feel or sense initially trying to build that?
Well, I think it usually is about leverage when it comes to my industry. Are you able to have leverage on finding founders, helping founders, building something? And I was coming in without any levers. I hadn't built any specific domain specific knowledge set. And so that was the challenge. And a lot of people go and say, "Oh, I just want people to accept me." And I realized, no, I just didn't have a context that was compelling. And that kind of gets into the way I invest. Like if there's not an of course reason to say yes, then there's nothing there. And so I said, okay, what will it take to build? I was helping host events that were behavior design influenced, and I was building context for people I was meeting that I did not expect. I was keeping an eye out in every single way for people that had some point of serendipity that others would benefit from meeting. And I think what it is in building out leverage, one of it is just building a strength in an area of knowledge, connectivity, or expertise. For me, I was a high efficiency um, builder. So, and there's an example that comes to mind. In high school, I was a pole vaulter, and pole vaulting is essentially a science of taking horizontal movement and as efficiently as possible launching it vertically. So, like you're running in with a gigantic 15-foot fiberglass pole, you bend it, and you're like, okay, do I make all the mechanics work so that I can go up higher? And so it's basically it starts with whatever speed you have and the efficiency with which you convert it into that direction. And so I think there are some people that just go really, really fast and they have a huge community or leverage point. And for me, it was how efficiently can I find this person needs this? I absolutely can find someone from that. So in the beginning, I was making one-on-one introductions. Every time I found somebody who would be serendipitously connected to somebody else, I made the intro. I've made probably in my life, probably over 10,000 introductions if I had to guess.
Yeah,
Like I know I made at least 1,000 last year, so I think if we're replicating it, like definitely up there. And
yeah.
so as once I started doing that, then more and more people came in and had a flow of gravity to me of, oh, do you know somebody for this thing? Do you know somebody for that thing? So I think the biggest lesson I learned was I have to build leverage and either be really efficient at input to output of like, I meet someone great, they can meet somebody else great, or
Yeah,
just meet a ton of great people.
I love it. And so for you kind of breaking up to start your own fund with Genverse Ventures, what was the launching pad for you to do that and what became the focus?
Well, the launching pad was I was at a fund where I kept seeing deals that made sense from this behavioral framework and they kept not doing them. And I said, well, I should probably try this myself if I think I can do it differently. So from that fund, I decided to raise a fund. And it was just sort of I was curious about what was possible. And so I decided to build up a larger fund for it. And I couldn't help but exploring, saying, what happens if I apply this behavior science angle to venture investing, which there's some applications, but there's not a lot of examples of people saying clearly this is a relevant model of thinking for this industry. And your second part of your question was,
Oh, in terms of, building it out, how did you decide kind of where you were gonna focus, from stepping out of, like, traditional venture, shall we say?
I had some lessons in the beginning. I just said I wanted to find companies that could build out their ecosystem. Admittedly, if I look at the first investment I made out of that fund with the last one, dramatic night and day difference in terms of evolution and clarity of thinking. So I was coming in and said, "Oh, that seems cool. Let's do a check." And so I was going through, and was very grateful. I started off raising very slowly, so I could only do 5 and 10K checks out of what would become a $3 million fund, and those were my mistakes. And I learned very quickly. And I also refused to pay myself anything out of that fund until everybody gets all their money back. So we had some extra shots on goal because I wasn't paying myself anything, and we had that extra money to do so. And so I got clarity on the thesis the more I learned from those initial companies and seeing the loops of, oh, there wasn't very clear demand on those after all. And so it was very rapid iteration, very Thomas Edisonian of saying, hey, the light bulb did not turn on the first 10,000 times. Fortunately for me, it was only like 10 or 20 from my own angel investments and the fund ones, which composed a very small amount of the fund. And then I was able to grow and progress very quickly.
And talk to me about how you started to apply kind of psychology and how that was influencing your investment decisions or how you were looking at it from a team perspective, or how did you kind of be like, I guess some people would think about it in theories and we always talk about team evaluation in interviews, but from my experience working with entrepreneurs, I mean, you have your biases, you have very clear things that people are like, I look for this one thing. And if you don't have this one thing, I don't want to do it, regardless of how good it might be. So I'm super curious about how you start looking at it and like developing a framework around it.
Well, I think I backed into it. I said, what would it take for a company to be successful?
Yeah.
And you sort of say, it is very fundamental. For a company to be successful, they need to have enough money to not run out before they get customers. They need to get to customers very easily. They need the customers to pay very easily. And they need to get to customers in a way that is very defensible, and they need to have a way that they can get them to pay a lot. And so I
Yeah.
said, okay, what are the most capital efficient ways to get to a lot of customers that are willing to pay a lot that you can defend against other people? And so I backed into, well, what causes a company to spread amongst its customers? Because if you're doing hand to hand combat, going store to store, selling restaurant software, you're not building a lot of leverage. But if you can get into a ownership group or a private equity group, then you have a different expansion point. And so I was thinking, okay, then there has to be a lot of distribution leverage because that's the only way you're going to get to a lot of customers without running out of money. And so it became, what are the theories of why things spread amongst an ecosystem? So it was one, people that have a hard social proof ease of saying yes after somebody comes in. So you get one customer, everybody else will say yes. Or it could be there's a very high trust. If any customer says yes, you can go through. Or there's a high velocity saying, I have this accreditation body that it will say to every single person in their body, this is the one to go for. All of those points are ones of leverage. And then I realized those are only really true in very particular verticals. So, food safety, if you're looking at pharmaceutical manufacturing, if you're looking at emissions, places where people have a built need saying, I need to do it. And then I said, why would they say yes? And it was, well, either somebody's telling me I have to say yes because otherwise I'm paying a fine, or it's very close to the business case of my revenue or my savings. So, not, oh, this thing will be easier and you kind of save time. It's saying, hey, if you don't pay, you're going to get fined. Or if you don't have this, you're explicitly going to lose 20% of your money. And so compliance driven or operationally driven platforms are much more important to me than sort of creativity driven ones or things where it's sort of, this helps you plan better. That's nice, but it's not as clear of a, oh my goodness, this is clear brass tacks, a need I have. And so then I thought about competitive differentiation, saying, where would I find a place where I know there's not going to be 50 competitors raising rounds from Sequoia and Andreessen, et cetera, that are about to do the same thing? So I don't go in the broad, we're a general fintech or a general legal tech. I say, where can somebody grow within their ecosystem so quickly that they have defensibility? So I have a company in my first fund that is in the food safety space, and they had worked with previous consultants and brands in that space. My best performing company is in the radiology space, and the founder had worked in radiology, had sold to employers for their platform. And so I knew you could get to every one of these customers very quickly and they have a reason to buy in because it's
Yeah.
there. So it's almost like when you have an island and it's evolutionarily saying, okay, what species is going to own the island? It's either they can procreate very quickly, they move very quickly, they can mark their territory, they have high defensibility. So it's sort of evolutionary in that sense. But those are some of the fundamentals that got me there. Just saying, if I can tell a theory as to why any company, regardless of hype,
Yeah.
has a chance of succeeding, those are the fundamentals I focus on.
Yeah, and I'm curious from your perspective, taking, that lens of how much of investing do you look at is actually like understanding people versus markets?
Well, most of the West Coast investors say it's always about team. And I 100% agree that if you don't have a compelling team, it doesn't matter how good the product is, unless it's just so obvious that they could succeed even if anybody had run it.
Yeah.
But I've also seen companies get invested in by friends of mine where the team was amazing, but that idea absolutely had no basis for being the kind of company that would earn revenue, defend against revenue, et cetera.
Yeah.
Some funds will say, we just want to invest in an index of all the amazing best teams we can have, and that'll generate returns. I'm like, yeah, I had a team that I invested in that was a team-based bet. Their first idea, I was curious to see how it go. They pivoted to something completely different, and they're one of my fastest growing companies now. So I index highly on team as
Yeah.
the primary. I like if I'm not impressed by them, if I think I could do the job better, there's no way I would even touch it. But I don't need it to be the absolute best person in the world ever running a startup. I say, is this the person that can own their ecosystem in this way? Is it the best person for customs compliance? Is it the best person for pharmaceutical data? Is it the best person for building payment rails for a specific sector?
Yeah.
That's what I focus on. And I need it to be an idea where I know they're not going to be spending 2 years and 2 years worth of money on figuring out if companies want to buy their thing.
Yeah.
So the ideal combination I would say is 80% amazing team, 20% this is very clearly something in customer demand. Because I
Yeah.
also found founders that were amazing people, but when it came to their specific company, they either lost focus or they were trying to do too much. And so there's, I think, the quality of the people, the quality of how they run a company, and the quality of the demand that they have. Because you can find somebody who's insanely smart and can build faster than anybody, but if they don't know how to refine and focus, I think that's the last part. So the things when I underwrite team is focus, speed of learning, and resilience are the top three. If they know what they're working on, they will not give up and they will continue learning as quickly as possible. Again, it's like the fundamentals. That's usually a pretty good iteration. But also, I don't raise a fund to say I'm investing in good people because LPs have that all the time. So that's why we have the angle of the other things coming into.
Yeah, and I'm curious in terms of sort of, going back to sort of the best person, for that product, idea, company. What have you seen across since you're looking at different industries and different kind of focuses and wanting to be sort of that defender in their market and that kind of nobody else is looking at? What sort of patterns are you seeing in terms of those type of leaders? And then I'm curious about how you go about measuring grit.
Yeah. So the characters of those leaders, one is a bottoms up customer insight. They're not saying, oh, I think this looks like an interesting market. Let me find out. Either they have some data point saying this is what is deeply in demand, or they've done the research, or they say, hey, I'm obsessed with solving for this. Non attachment to the solution. I think if they say, hey, I love these customers, I want to build for them, that's most important for me. I would say beyond that, measuring grit. It is either they've overcome something in life that was deeply traumatic or stressful, and they've sort of shown that resilience, or they are somebody who has demonstrated over time. It's not saying you could say, oh, one day I can tell they've got grit, but you sort of see how fast do they learn, how much have they adapted, what are the stories that they have of what they've learned and how quickly they've run. Um, I think that's another component. And then the last, I think it has to do with what their motivations are. If
Yeah.
somebody is too focused on just doing social good, that's wonderful, but then they're not necessarily saying, I need to grow this as large a company as possible. And if they're too focused on just the fundamentals of uh, growing the company, then they might not have a fundamental business. I think
Yeah.
I don't typically find people that are driven by hype matter for me. I care that
Mhm.
somebody knows how to raise, who knows how to tell a story, but I
Yep.
want them to say, I'm looking for this kind of an outcome rather than I want to get the TechCrunch headline or I want to raise it high of a valuation as possible. My best
Yeah.
performing company did not raise at a high valuation for 2 years, and then they found fit, and everybody started coming in after that.
Yeah.
So, it's a combination of they wanna do the right things right, they understand from the ground up what they care about, and their motivations are based in being able to care about the fundamentals that matter for the company rather than what matters for their ego.
And I'm curious because it gets kind of pushed back in terms of it's always this conversation, which is really fascinating with entrepreneurs I work with about grit and resilience and how do you measure it? And if you ask the right questions, and sometimes still they come in and it's like they're folding under pressure. And I always love to ask this question because everybody has a little bit of a different response in terms of their kind of go to question and how you would ask to sort of understand if you believe they've got that underlying factor. So what are your kind of go-to questions for you to kind of assess that resilience grit in somebody?
Yeah, well, I mean, my first question usually I ask is saying, of all the things you could spend 10 years of emotionally laborious cortisol-inducing work on, why is this the thing that you wanna do?
Right.
Nobody that goes into this trying to think it's gonna be easy, they say, "This is the thing I have to." So I ask that question, and I just say,
Yep.
"Why couldn't you say no to this? Because there's plenty of other options." And so it's either, "This is the thing I've been doing my whole life. I invested in a 4th generation waste hauler who was building a software-enabled marketplace for waste hauling." And I said, "Well, I believe you're gonna keep building there. I'm not too doubtful." Or it's somebody who had I think the family loss or like a family issue in a specific space is important, but then that's sort of the willing. I don't know about the ability. Other questions I ask is I definitely dive in a competitive landscape. I like to ask how much they think about it. I sort of say what are the biggest lessons they've learned, what are the feedbacks they've gotten. And it really depends on the company because asking questions of pharmaceutical manufacturing versus utility negotiation versus animal health, very different. Sometimes I'll ask them how big is enough for you? And I like to understand like what matters to them, what they think about. Do they have a chip on their shoulder from a previous exit that just wasn't as big as they wanted it to be? Um, I think there's that. If they show hunger, that's important to me. If somebody says like, "Oh, I just thought I'd build in the space and it's kind of curious," no, I mean, I work generally 7 days a week, and I consistently want to be at the best that I can be. And for somebody who does that, you can kinda tell. There's other things, like, I've learned lessons from other companies when a founder's traveling all the time and it's not exactly work relevant if they are really unfocused and they have a bunch of hobbies. I have a bunch of hobbies too, but, like, I have my things to escape, but this is my laser focus during the day. And also how they respond to feedback. Emotional volatility, I think, is a big feeding point of, resilience. Because if you can't manage your own stress or your emotions, you might hit points where your fuse box just blows and you cannot handle it. And
Yeah.
so somebody's like, "Oh, yeah, totally." Like, I had a founder I invested in. He, was doing great, lost half of his revenue in a week, and he called me, he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking through this. What do I do?" And I gave him some advice. 2 days later, he said, "Oh, yeah, by the way, we closed with 2 more contracts. Here's everything about fundraising." I said, "Okay, great. Navigate it."
Yeah.
It's like one thing to have a quick cortisol response to something, but then to say, "Okay, I'm now going to find a way," that's different. Like,
Yeah.
I had
Some
a
will move the
summit
stressful, but we're gonna move forward.
or just saying, like, or I'm going to work through it. I can't
Yeah.
say, "Oh, we're doomed." Like, I had a summit that I'm hosting in May for pre-seed investors, and I got in, I said, "Oh, we're not full yet. Am I gonna mess this up?" And they said, "Nope. What are the actions I gotta take?" And I did a full outreach, and now we're doing fine. But sometimes it's just people saying, "The best I can do is giving my all, whatever the results may be, and live with that." But people who have a high I think the way I would get to that is saying, in addition to low emotional volatility, high, learning factor, trauma in their life or something that they've worked through, a reason for existing. I think the other thing is high sense of self-agency, saying it is not the world happening to me. It's a role that I play in the world. What are my mindsets? What are the things that I do? And somebody who can reflect and say, what role can I have? That is a big part of it as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. What do you think are some biases that investors fall into most often?
Oh, anchoring bias, hype bias are the two biggest ones. So anchoring, I mean, hype bias matters. So there'll be a lot of people say, "Oh my goodness, Andreessen invested at this pre-seed company. They must be amazing." And they sort of get into, frankly, momentum-based investing. Now, large funds investing at the Series A and beyond is actually a data point, but anything below that where it's very small checks, they are just claiming optionality. And so a big bias I think people get stuck in is, oh, there's an amazing lead. I've seen companies that I've shared with my LPs that I say, "Oh, Andreessen's invested," and all of a sudden they want to pile money in. I say, "Guys, that doesn't make a difference." And like my best performing company, nobody wanted to touch until they were at a mass level. And even then, it wasn't a very hypey investor that bought in. And so I think some people say they care about who else said yes rather than the fundamentals of the business.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you might get into an Anthropic at a $623 million seed valuation or whatever it was. I think it was in the 600s.
Yeah.
And that'll return. But there's a lot of companies. I mean, you look at YC, you can find some amazing companies there. It's not going to be every single one. It just because they have a seal of approval, it doesn't always make a difference. That's the biggest bias, I think, is simply, I'll call it the sheepism.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And, from a community perspective and kind of using that as a strategic advantage, what do you think, really separates real community from surface level networking?
I almost gag when I hear service level networking because I'm just over it. It's you go into an
You and me
event.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't do that stuff. Anytime somebody sells me, we have the biggest community of XYZ, I said, okay, I'm not going. That's not what I care about. Networking is hi, 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 glad handing off business cards. Let's get a coffee. Let's see what transaction I can get done. Community building is saying, I want to build a context with a person and whatever comes from that, comes from it. I just want to meet good people. So for me, an effective community has curation, context, and some overt benefit. And it doesn't have to be an outcome. It could just be a place of belonging, be a place of identity. Networking is I want to have a list of names that I can message out of the blue without a really like, oh, by the way, do you know somebody I can work with for this thing? And I say, I have no contact with you. I don't care. Effective community building is saying, hey, I want to have you in my orbit because I think there's something of benefit to you. And when a time comes for something fun to happen, maybe I'm not attached to it, but I believe that you're somebody worth being proximate to just because I think you're good people. And so a good community loops people in. It gives them a place of belonging, not just a place of giving attention. And it's focused on, frankly, having a context worthwhile. A lot of people will say, join my newsletter for the thing. And they just say, they just want to have a number of readers of their newsletter versus saying, hey, this is a thing where I want it to matter to you and I want to be worth your time. I'm happy to add you to it if you'd like. And so there's a balance at the two.
Yeah. And, I feel like with so much advancements in tech and everything, there is a stronger pull to want community to find it as we kind of get all disbanded and disconnected. And, for people in search of that, especially in a world where if you're coming out of college, those entry level jobs are non existent now and they're looking for, do you know how to do this? Cause like your basic entry level job, it's automated now. Like we don't need this. For people to build meaningful relationships, to find other people, I think it's important going through the same thing, but also people who can help. Where do you think people should be looking? How do you kind of, avoid some of the bad actors out there because there's such a volume of, you know,
There's
quote unquote
plenty. Yeah.
communities being called?
Well, I think it's first of all seeing where people are speaking about the community versus the person running it. So I think I got invited to, hey, we would love to have you speak at our AI summit in 3 weeks. And I said, I don't know you. I've never heard of this summit. I don't know why I'm being invited. Referral value is the biggest thing. I think what I do is when you're first new to building community, go out and meet a bunch of people and sort of figure out who are the nodes where good opportunities pass through them. Meet the people that are the nodes, build time, make sure that it's worth their time as well. Because if they're a node, they're getting a ton of requests and a ton of inbound, but just say, hey, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to support, be around them when things come through. But I think if nobody's referring the community, it doesn't matter how much somebody's touting it, unless it's very well curated. I think it should be somebody's focusing on, hey, we want a good fitting group rather than the biggest group. And oftentimes just find out anybody who has something in common with you. If you're into vibe coding, if you're into building agentic workflows, they're like, oh, where are you learning? Where are you keeping an eye up? And I think the best way to do it is, frankly, the easiest way to make sure you're in the right room is to build it yourself. And so if you're saying, hey, I'm a former consultant trying to get into workflow, start the community for it. Just say, hey, I'm going to get a breakfast for consultants building agentic workflows. Be on Saturday mornings and let it be a thing. The biggest thing I find is people get really impatient saying, oh my gosh, it's to be at 100 people. I'm like, no, it'll take a year and a half to 2 years to get any community to have its own momentum, even if you're hosting it monthly or so. And so just say, hey, I just want to gather good people around to do it. I had a community like this starting about a few months ago where I was like, I love learning about side hustles. I've met somebody who is a watch dealer, somebody who is a rare plant dealer, somebody who is investing in casino truck stops in Louisiana. And I said, it's kind of fun just meeting people that have side hustles. And so I put it up and I said, hey, anybody wants to meet? I built a WhatsApp community. We did our first quarterly dinner, sort of BY, bring your own food. So potluck dinner. And it was a great gathering. It was only 6 people, but I'm not trying to push it to be 50 people every time. I said, hey, we'll just host some people and be consistent is the biggest thing and allowing time to be the factor that changes. That's the thing I would say. So if you're not finding a good community that people are recommending and referring, one, you can always find out online, do search. Two, get referrals, and three, build your own.
Yeah, I love it. And I think so many people too are hung up on like a certain number of it in order to be successful versus I'm like, no, quality over quantity any day of the week is what you want.
Oh yeah, like I have a community that is only 17 people, and it is my highest density of fun community because I keep it so specific. I have a community of 800 that is wonderful too,
Yeah.
but it just matters on is every person in the group worthwhile for the group, and is it worthwhile for them? That's it.
Yeah.
If that
Yeah.
is true, wonderful. It could be any size. And then you get into how to build the context and keep the noise down and make sure it's proper. Like I'm in 5 or 6 WhatsApp groups where I see 50 messages every day. If it's just, I've got this event, I've got that event, and I don't know who anybody is. There's no curation. Whereas
Yeah.
mine, it's 5 messages a day at most.
Yeah.
Usually take a couple days between, and I delete anything that's not relevant so people know not to mess around. So it depends.
And that's so helpful. I always think about when people are like, "Hey, can I add you into what like a WhatsApp group chat?" I'm like, maybe like what is it about? Because I don't need my phone blowing up and like just being overwhelmed when I look because there's just like 1,000 unread messages." Like, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the rule should be is only a good community if every message is worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're like, oh, every message I want to read, that's worthwhile. Otherwise, no.
Yeah. And I want to kind of dovetail into terms of, that obviously being very intentional and thoughtful in terms of how you're going about, how you're connecting. In terms of, I'll call it the psychology in terms around like decision making, understanding it. Why do you think people often make decisions that they know aren't optimal? Like it makes me think of a community where you're like, you just say yes, or like, there's this like interesting draw I feel around certain people, in business and in life where you can the thoughtfulness is not necessarily there.
I think there's a few things. It depends on one's self awareness, one's self value, and one's prioritization. So if you don't know what is best for you, it's very hard to say yes to the right things. Honestly, I think a lot of times you just got to grow a bunch of plants before you start pruning. Um, I think sometimes people anchor outside of themselves where they find value. So, oh, if somebody likes me or something I should do, then that's worthwhile versus do I want to do this genuinely? And so getting really clear and really reflective on what kind of people you want to spend time around, what kind of contexts make sense for you, what do you enjoy? That's important. I think the last thing is have enough self love because sometimes you'll get invited and feel guilty to do something or invest in something. And so, like, hey, I appreciate it. I'm going to hold off. Thank you so much. And so I think a lot of people are anchored outside of themselves in a should place. The number of people that are people pleasers or that think, oh, someone invited me, I can't not show up. And I say, hey, I really appreciate the invite. I'm unavailable. Please include me for the next time if it works for me. And that's fine. So I think it's a combination of self-awareness, self-love, and prioritization.
Yeah. How do you think, should understand sort of psychological patterns and looking at it? For some, I think it's a little bit more intuitive. For others, it is like the people side like baffles their brain because they just don't look at it that way or how they're built. I always think of like the engineer versus the creative,
Yeah.
graphic designer.
Well, I think the biggest issues that some people sometimes get is that somebody says they're interested and you're like, oh my God, they're in. No,
Yeah.
all it means is that they're interested. Is I think letting the actions be the descriptor.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say, oh, they wanted to see more information. That means they're going to invest in my fund or my startup, or they wanted to talk more about the job. It means they want to do it. I have had people try to recruit me for jobs and take me out for 3 lunches, and they still decide to go with somebody else because they wanted somebody younger. I'm like, okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
fine. Thank you for the free lunches. But I never expected it from them. I've had people, and I've had other people that hired me off of one phone call, literally. I've had people that said they would invest in my fund, and then I had to chase them for a year, and they were like, oh, it's not a fit. And I've had other people that said in 12 minutes, I'm in for, 6 figures.
Yeah.
And same thing for startups. Like I've seen startups that got a yes from somebody and then took 6 months. So I think the thing is, if you're not seeing increasing energy, if they're not increasingly leaning in, let it be.
Yeah.
So trust actions, let people do what they're going to do, assume nothing. And if I assume that I'm not going to have any money in and then all of it's coming in, wonderful. But I
Yeah.
think that's the thing, is that people get too optimistic. It's like when you're in your romantic life and you see the potential in somebody, but they're not taking any action towards that potential, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so leaning into what is demonstrable, what is understandable, and unless somebody has never gone back on their word, take them on their actions.
Yeah. So important. That was my biggest lesson younger is don't fall in love with potential. Uh, I think everybody has a moment where they're like, "I've learned that now." Like, that was a tough lesson, but we got there. And then, I wonder, what do you think founders really struggle with that isn't talked about enough?
One thing to and I'll get to that question is, I think the other one is we fall in love with potential and we want to believe that if everything goes right. And the best way I've learned is just see what does it look like and how does this person show up?
Yes.
Say, when you have a failure, what does that look like? And so asking more ahead of time, saying, I have a sense of what they could be, but how do they show up? What founders struggle with, I think honestly, a lot of them are stressed out of their minds building and they feel lonely. They feel like they can't ever reveal weakness. And I think a biggest struggle is they all want to update when things aren't good because they're fearful of one, their identity is wrapped up in their company. They're fearful of being judged and left on their own. And the biggest thing you do is say, I'm going to communicate early and often. In every update I have for my investors, I say, hey, here's all the bad news first. And then they get used to it. And also they can take action on it. And I much prefer when somebody tells me the bad news because then I have time to prepare and I know what's going on. That founder who said, hey, we lost half of our revenue yesterday. Great. I know I can trust that you're going to communicate when anything comes up versus the person who only checks in once a year. And when they check in, they need help. I'm like, I don't know if you're engaging people properly enough to have them help you. And so I think it's the issues that they struggle with. The one is like, I'm alone. I can't tell people how I'm feeling and I can only tell the good news. And it's like, no, you're not alone. There's plenty of people that feel the same way. You probably should tell people everything. And people will support you the more that you communicate, independent of what the thing is, provided that you show grounding and agency in that communication.
Yeah. And, for any founders that you work with that are really struggling in terms of kind of, that identity and obviously almost that resistance to want to really be vulnerable and be super transparent and kind of, I always say, give the bit more of the marketable version to the town hall versus the truth of the matter and then how they're going to go about fixing it, but also being real, like, yeah, if this doesn't go the way you plan, we're going to have some tough decisions to make, whether that might be cuts or anything like that. How do you look at either building community around them to help, kind of have a shared experience from that perspective or help them kind of unravel the fear tied up in a this is my baby and I'm nothing without this?
Well, I think the biggest issue is that fear and anxiety come from inaction. So the issue is usually if they haven't done anything about it. If I say, hey, here's the three ways this can go wrong, here's my plan in every single circumstance,
Yeah.
then it's not a question of what are you going to do. It's saying, okay, which thing will you do? And
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest issue. And some people can get comfort by understanding that's okay and that's normal. Usually the biggest constraint for people is just not knowing what is normal to do. And so if they're on their own saying, okay, it is normal. If everybody said, update your investors on everything that goes on, and everybody said that, there wouldn't be a feeling because it become a knowledge and known. There's a asymmetry between what we expect is needed versus what is the truth, and people try to act based on that. And so community, I think in that case is helpful to convey that and approve it. But I think it's more of an education context than it is a comfort context. And I do think the biggest lesson people miss is when you are stressed, action is the thing that reduces it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple of situations where I look at the amount of people having a tough time saying the hard thing.
Yeah.
With and, even in, like, tenured executive teams of, this fear-based of, maybe your job's at stake, but also just the seemingly, like, a fear of judgment if I speak truth to the person that has the most power in this. And it's
Yeah.
fascinating to watch, and then also, no matter what, like, knowing that that they should, the almost sitting back and, like, "We'll just let it pan out how it's gonna pan out."
Well, I think there's two parts of that. There's the politics and the self-curating context. So one is I am not somebody who's great at politics when I have to report to somebody else. I am great at politics when I am promising somebody something that I'm going to do for them of my own choice and my own accord. So I'm not made for corporate culture. I've learned this. I've nearly been fired for every job I had because I said, look, there's a right answer. If it's right, then we should all be able to agree on that. And not, oh, I think it's right. It's like, no, we probably should support somebody when XYZ happened in the office. Like, that's pretty right. And so I curate the context where I can be my full self. Now, that's a privilege. I'm not going to say everybody can do that. Like, especially as we have a more lean job market, that is not the case. But I try to be myself from the beginning. I give people, I think one of the biggest issues is expectations and say, hey, here is how I tend to think. How do I best manage that with this? Now, I think the other part, though, is you do need to understand how to talk to people. Like, you
Mhm.
can't just say, oh, you're being an idiot. It's saying, hey, what would it look like to consider this option? How are you feeling about it? Where are you feeling strong? And all those ideas, they
Yeah.
take you too. So it's sort of pick the best environments that fit how you are and be the best version of yourself as well. So you're not making a blubbering idiot of yourself. Like, I have very little shame in being direct. but I'm also never gonna tell somebody the wrong thing based on the context. Uh, if it's a context where I can't handle saying differently, then I probably shouldn't have been in that context in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. And I think always in those situations, like you have a choice of how you want to show up and do you feel good at the end of the day, and there's and obviously going to be limits depending on where you're at and levels and all those things. But I think always fundamentally you see those people sit in those roles longer, the more resentment builds, the more this, and you start to see you're like, this is just not good for you. Like either you have to speak your truth or you need to leave because nobody's winning in this situation.
The distance between who somebody is and who they show themselves to be is their level of unhappiness.
Yeah.
If I have nothing that is different from how I am and what I wanna say, I'm decently aligned. Versus
Yeah.
if I believe the sky is blue, but I have to say the sky is green for my context, like, you're gonna feel so much cognitive dissonance and stress from just maintaining the 2 realities.
Yeah.
Doesn't really align.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast and it was Kerry Washington was speaking and she's talking about the difference between the presentation of self and the truth of self. And I was like, oh yeah, Mike, that's it. That's a great way to put it of like where you kind of see those differences and like the lack of congruence. And I hope because it feels like there's a lot of disconnection in that way, building in different areas. So I hope that there is kind of a reckoning for people to be able to kind of come back and operate in a way that makes sense and they get to stand in their truth. With everything happening with how fast tech is moving, the pace in which the world is moving and kind of wild west in certain areas, we're missing frameworks. Things are building quicker than we know what to do with. And like I've never seen, in a week you're using a tool and already a week after it's so much better. And you're like, oh, it couldn't do this before. Oh, now I can do this. Like this is crazy. It's like this new toy that keeps getting better each time you want to interact with it. How do you see, venture kind of evolving over the next decade with the way things are at and kind of the AI bubble bursting, but also still kind of the hot thing?
Well, there's a lot of questions wrapped up in that in terms of
Yeah.
what funds are investing in, how they're working.
Yeah.
Um, I think in terms of what they're investing in, we are seeing these emerging whales that can do most of the things. And I think we really have to think about defensibility of the investments that we're doing. I've seen growth stage investors looking for physical atom style platforms of we want to like I invested in a company that does waste hauling as a marketplace. And they said, we love that company because that's going to be very hard for AI just to replace it
Right.
and things like that. And so there are people that are building the moonshots. And I think every layer that we think is defensible, it gets more and more restrictive. And
Yeah.
there are network effects you can maintain, unique data collection, regulatory tailwinds, being embedded in the payment rails for a specific kind of company. Those things make a difference. But also, you got to think about it. And on the tech side, money is becoming a commodity. There's plenty of money for the founders that are on one side and the other. There is a bifurcation right now in terms of funds. You either got to be really big and could do multi-stage, or you got to be really small and can get in before that. And also, those are different outcomes. If you're a large fund, you need a 10 billion to $1 trillion exit to return what you need to do. Whereas for me, if I have a company that if they exit for $1 billion, I return my fund 4x. And so it really depends on the 2 games, but it's becoming more and more of the, I'm a small fund going early or I'm a gigantic fund. Those 50, $60 million enterprise software funds are not quite there. But I think before it used to be, oh, anybody who's built something that's kind of compelling is interesting. And now it's saying, truly, why will you own your ecosystem? There's 50 companies doing robotics. There's a whole atlas of humanoid robotics companies out there right now, and they all can make some money, but the amount of total market cap in a market where there's 100 players, if each of them are worth 1 billion and the market is only going to be 2 trillion, like you're kind of cramming in there. Like there's not going to be 5 players that are worth 1 trillion, et cetera. And so there's a lot of refinement. I think also there's the expectation now for investors that you have an AI approach to your workflow. Like you can't do everything manual in terms of how much you have to scale, how fast you need to research. I've seen companies that were closed 2 weeks within my first meeting of them. And so you got to be able to move fast and find conviction.
And how are you thinking about, with the development of this tech and different products, about even understanding the impact on human behavior more? If I think back to like social media launches, like nobody knew the deep psychological effects that it was going to have on people. And now you're kind of, they're showing scans about people using a lot more AI to problem solve and not, the cognitive critical thinking function not lighting up as much. How are you even thinking about that when you're meeting with teams of products they're building or what potentially is going to kind of happen from, I think, almost a human perspective? It is that community going to be building going to be even more important to companies and their customers?
Well, I think there's a way to break this down differently of where does technology become a bane or a boon for how we operate? If it is things about learning, research has shown consistently the more you put technology into learning, it actually the lower the learning gets. Even if you have good iPads and screens like that, humans are wired to retain more when told through human stories. And so even if you put a kid to sleep, if you have them on a screen or reading a book to that, or they're reading a book, they'll retain a little bit, but their brain doesn't really light up. If you tell them just your day and how you navigated a situation, there's so much more neural development and activity that comes from those kind of situations. Same thing happens in school. The more that it's taught as a human rather than I'm going through 50 screens. I don't like Kindles because every page looks alike. I don't have any physical touch kinesthetic knowledge of where I was when I read the page. I still remember certain books and where I was when I was reading them.
Me too. I
And
have all
that's,
the books behind me. I'm like, I don't want to. I need the book in my hand. I like the smell of the paper. Like I need it all.
yeah. And in terms of companies being built, like, there will be some AI communities. I don't think we're gonna get to the point where we have her as the live example of everything. I will say, like, I do get emotional advice from AI platforms. It's just like, "Oh, thinking, how do I approach this thing?" But it's sort of just a double checking of it. I don't think we're gonna get to Ready Player One. Like, we just saw that Meta shut down their entire metaverse product after spending $80 billion on trying to build a VR world and all of those things. I wasn't really sold on this back in the day when Sandbox and all these other companies in the Web3 era were saying, we're going to build a virtual community. Like, no, we're still humans. And so I think we learn better from people. And I do think there's a place for AI. Anything where I am less of a human based on how much work I'm doing and how many papers I have to sift through when that's just not needed anymore. Um, so I think in a perfect world, we have people. Tech allows us to do less of the things that make us less human and gives us more space to do more of the things that are more human. But we should not confuse the two of tech where I need to be a human and a human where I need to be acting like tech.
And for you, starting when like I'll just say your first kind of steps into venture to where you're at now, I'm curious about kind of your evolution of thinking and how your perspective on success has changed.
Honestly, there's an imposter syndrome that comes when you're first running your fund because in running a fund, the bad outcomes are going to happen before the good outcomes. And so that might change a little bit now. They might happen equally fast in the AI realm. But there's a J curve. Like your results are kind of bad, bad, bad. And then the ones that are growing, like, oh, I'm not a complete idiot yet. And so I think in the beginning, my thinking was, I don't want to lose money. And now I say, okay, I want to get to a 10x return on a fund. That would be
Yeah.
great. My LPs can put in $100,000 and make 1 million. I can make 9, $10 million based on this work. Like that's amazing upside. But I think there was a learning of what is the right expectation. I think also when you look at the stats, half of funds don't return capital just what was put in as the principal. That's
Yeah.
shameful. And I say, I'm embarrassed if I don't get above a 3x, and I'm not happy until I get above a 5x. And
Yeah.
that's apparently, if you get a 5x fund, that puts you in the top 1 or 2% of all funds, I think. And
Yeah.
that's just kind of sad. There's a lot of bad actors. So I think it was, yeah, expecting more of myself, knowing I can do more. And it's just when you get the reps and you start seeing the success curves. And
Yeah.
every new fund, you're like, "Oh, am I an idiot again?" And then they start growing, you're like, "Okay, I've learned and I'm growing enough."
No, I love that. I asked you this question when we first met, but I feel like people also need to know, and it kind of ties into my questions in terms of kind of principles that guide your decisions. And you've met, like, hey, I'm working all the time, but I'm focused. And with all the post-its behind you, with like the visual representation for you to organize and think and know, talk to us a little bit about the system you've created. And did it come out of nowhere or instantly where you're like, just started doing Post-its, you're like, "Okay, wait, I think I've got something here."
Well, I mean, also, it's not just the ones behind me, like, we have a full spectrum of all the things over on the sides, and it goes over to both sides too. Like, I was just starting to track things that I didn't always track. I think there are things you can put in a linear workflow and you say, hey, I want to just track the things. All my text messages is where I keep all the to-dos from people that I've met. These are the things where it's very easy to lose something in a spreadsheet or one of 1,000 tabs you have on your computer. And if I just say, hey, here's all the people that I get deal flow from. Here are the companies that I'm currently diligencing right now. Like these are the two I've invested in out of my first fund. These are the next two I want to invest in. And then these are the ones in kind of stack ranking, like a food pyramid or Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Um, it's a good way of tracking. Now, I don't update these every single day. It's just the things that I like having. And also, like you were saying, there's a feeling of having something be physical rather than just stuck in my computer. So it makes a difference. I don't need everything on paper. I have a digital version of all of it, but also I don't like empty walls. And I don't need everything to be completely white behind me. My bookshelf's over there, and I said, okay, this works.
Yeah, I love it. What keeps you curious?
New ideas. I think there's still, even if you shine a flashlight into every corner of a house, there's still a nook and cranny behind the couch or in the corner where you just learn something new. Like the possibilities of new things. If I was only looking at fintech, I'd be bored out of my mind because there's only so many things you can do and there's only so many ways. But knowing that like simulated medical education needs a ERP, if I learned that pharmaceutical manufacturing compliance doesn't have a good platform, like, oh, these are spaces I get to learn about. I just had a company that my LPs talked with today that was in the robotic inventory management space. And I said, "No, I don't know anything about that."
Yeah.
So I get basically paid to learn as much as I can about things and figure out which are the best things.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think two is just having more of a sense of the world, like every part of it.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite recommendations is this event series called Lectures on Tap, where some people know it deeply and some people just
Yeah.
don't. They have about 35,000 followers, I think,
Okay.
but they have professors and experts and reporters go to bars and they give lectures on their favorite things. So I've looked at talks on the causes of war and peace and the dying customs in our world across different cultures.
Yeah.
I recently went to one that was about the evolutionary psychology of beauty and attraction. And so those things keep me curious. And it's just
Yeah.
understanding the world. I think the possibility of what I can learn and what is true that I still don't know about keeps me curious. I
Love
feel
it.
weird if I'm not learning something new.
No, I agree. It's like one of those things where like it just keeps you young, like always constantly trying to figure things out. And so I want to sort of kind of close out with some rapid fire questions for you. What is one belief about venture you've had to unlearn?
Somebody saying yes doesn't matter. Somebody saying this company is great. I don't care if you're founded in your fundamental beliefs. I used to think, oh, I'm following great investors. That means I'm good. No, the best companies were the ones that nobody else agreed with, and I got in at a good price, and I get to watch how they grow.
Love it. A habit that helps you think clearly.
Processing thinking would be writing. Getting away
Okay.
from my thinking would be playing chess or talking to my parents, just giving me a space to let my brain relax a little bit. So either diving deep into the thinking or going
Yeah.
completely away from it so I can come back fresh.
Love it. One bias people should be more aware of.
They are biased towards comfort. The biggest plays you'll learn and grow are the things that are uncomfortable, the difficult conversation. And I think they see failure as a failure, not as learning how to navigate failure. So every time I have a rejection from something, I'm like, great, I'm in the process of doing it. And
Yeah.
so I think people are biased against imperfection, and I'm biased towards humanity. And so I think that's a way that people could approach it better.
Love it. What excites you the most about the future of community and investing?
Well, I think for better or for worse, we're going to need a lot more to be in touch with people as we go forward. We can't escape to our computers anymore because, frankly, there's not going to be a whole lot of computer-based jobs to go left. I think it's easier to find out the best ways to support each other, and I think people are more open to it. And I think even we're just going to kind of get to a point where like some people are going to just wish, oh, I really want to just be on a picnic with people, but after there's not really that many jobs left. So there's going to be a whole lot of job displacement, but I think we're going to be returning to a place of institutions and coming back together. That's my hope.
Yeah, I agree. In your own words, define what built for this means to you.
I would say the things I'm built for are the things that, frankly, are aligned with what I've learned, what I've experienced, what I believe. Probably what serves my inner child that probably is still looking to be supported and healed from all the things that I've learned in the past.
Yeah.
That is aligned in terms of how I can spend my time. So if it serves me psychologically, if I can serve others. And I think the last thing is it's your pain cave, the thing that nobody else wants to do. And you said, no, I enjoy this. That's when you're definitively built for something.
Amazing. So if anybody's listening and is in love with the way you think, how you approach companies, they might think, hey, I want to see if you'd be interested in what I'm building. What is the best way to learn more about your fund? How to get in touch, potentially send over their deck for you to look at.
Probably the easiest way is on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, even though it's X now.
I still do
Mike
too.
McCo-
I'm like, right, it's
yeah.
another thing now.
I actually have refused to update my app on my phone because I still want it to be staying as the blue
Yeah.
icon. But follow me on Twitter. I have a place there where people can, every month, I do a deal flow challenge where people can send me their deals and I share it with over 100 investors.
Yeah.
I've done deals that have come through that. I've gotten investments done for people. So usually, and there's a way to sign up for my newsletter on Twitter. So I think Twitter's like just a good home base of where everything else can be found.
Yeah. Is there any type of company that you're would love to come your way that you're looking for? We'll speak into an existence.
A company that is founded by somebody who knows their industry very well, where the customers are asking for the product far more than investors and they're willing to pay. And it feels like there's a pull, even if nobody thinks it's an interesting space. It could be as simple as simulated medical education ERPs or food safety or animal health, but something where there's a reason why they are in their vertical able to win, grow massive, and somebody will find it of value, and they have an insight that somebody else doesn't.
All right. Amazing. Well, I appreciate you taking time and I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you.